Good morning. I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now. I'm here with Ian Burns, our managing editor, all the way in from Ottawa. Snowing in Kelowna right now. A white powder coming down. Lots of snow in the mountains. Very little on the ground here in Kelowna. How's it looking in Ottawa there for you?
It's all white.
It's all white. There you go. It's not even Christmas, and it's an all white, a white February, right? Like as we kick off, we're into February 3rd. I guess the really big news is obviously the trade stuff, right? The trade stuff, the trade tariffs, and the turmoil that's happening in Canada, the U.S., and in Mexico. And in all that, we got a lot to do with this. But one of the things that this is a Blacklock story, Holly Down at Blacklock's there. And all this, the Prime Minister still will not recall Parliament and won't allow parliamentarians to debate what's the best course of action. And that's one of the things that is to a lot of people, and even CTV is pressing on it, like, why won't they recall Parliament?
Yeah, well, it's astonishing, isn't it? I don't have. I mean, that this Blacklock story isn't their usual kind of investigative job. I think this is just reporting what he said
Yeah.
on Saturday, where he kind of fumbled that question a bit. You'd think he would have been expecting that question, but he didn't really say anything. He
Yeah.
sort
He just
of,
said, we have the tools we need.
yeah, and that to me, look, just the political reality is that if we're going to go ahead now for real and have this trade war with the US, he doesn't really have any choice. He will have to recall Parliament because I just don't think that it's tenable. It's not possible to have Parliament suspended while you have a trade war with your biggest economic and military and cultural ally. So I think it would happen, but he just didn't want to say it at that point, maybe because he thinks that there's still possibly a way he can get away with it and not have to disturb the Liberal leadership race. But no, I think it will happen, and he just didn't know what to say really.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the question a lot of reporters that do get access to the MPs and that are starting to ask more and more often because it just doesn't make sense. Like, why won't you let democracy like run? I mean, even a CBC reporter, they've asked Pierre Poilievre if he would step aside so that they could recall Parliament, and he's like, no, I believe in democracy.
That was a funny one. I would advise people to actually look at that, like listen to that question because she didn't really say what Polyev thinks he said.
Hmm.
She thought that he'd said something like that. So she was like, "Can I just clarify? Is that what you're saying?" And then Polyev, I mean, in the most generous possible interpretation, Polyev just didn't understand what she said, and he answered incorrectly, or he answered based on having misheard it. But no, I don't know. I think that was just a mix-up, really. But Polyev, the reason that went viral a little bit, I think, is because he voiced a kind of frustration among many in Canada that the Liberals aren't really all that bothered about democracy, or their idea of democracy is we'll just look after everything and there won't be a sitting parliament. I think a lot of people are really annoyed about that, and so therefore Poilievre's response, a lot of people could understand that and quite liked it.
Well, I think that most people are really puzzled as to why we don't have Parliament in. It doesn't make a lot of sense to most people. So
Yeah, and I think as well, like we've discussed before, it's now get 4.5 years, no, 5.5 years, sorry, something like that, about 5.5 years now of a minority government. That's minority governments aren't they're not very good for promoting democracy in the sense that you're being represented in Parliament, I don't think, because inevitably, as we've seen with this sort of deal with the NDP, much smaller parties end up getting what they want. They have a much louder voice. It's like a disproportionate amount of power for a smaller party. And that sort of cheeses people off. So, in that context, and after COVID and everything, which was not a very democratic period of our history, I think people are quite sensitive about democracy, and it's becoming a real like topic. I mean, I usually it's associated with the liberals, isn't it? This defense of democracy, but I think it's actually probably a more sensitive subject on the right. I think the right is more upset about it than liberals.
Well, I mean, the Liberal Party seems to be using every little maneuver that they can to cling to power.
Yeah, and they've prorogued Parliament so that they can have a leadership election. That's obviously you can do that. That's constitutionally legit and all the rest of it. But it's, you know, sort of morally or ethically, it's really not very nice. It's like people don't really like that because
No.
that's suspending Canada's democracy so that your party can argue with itself and pick a
Yeah, well,
new
I mean,
leader.
in the darkest hour of our economic kind of like we're kind of like at an economic cliff here. We don't allow our parliamentarians to kind of debate the best path forward. That's the part that I think a lot of people are having a lot of trouble with.
Yeah, and yeah, even before this happened, the prorogation was looked upon as madness because we don't have to search around for very long to find quite a number of crises that Canada faces right now, and this has just gone right to the top and just kind of butted in and stolen the limelight. But there are a lot of other problems going on to do with housing, healthcare, etc. Inflation
Yeah.
still, or the cost of living still having a massive effect on people's lives.
Even Justin Trudeau in the past has said proroguing Parliament was undemocratic.
Yep, that was when it was done to him rather than by him.
Yeah. So let's move on to this leadership race, and we have to win, says Mark Carney. And so, with that said, he wants that signature climate program, that the consumer carbon tax. He wants that removed, and he wants the Liberal Party leadership to remove that because he said that's the only way they're going to win this election is to get rid of it. And I think there's a clip that's going viral of him saying, "Well, just put it on industries like steel because nobody buys steel," and that's really kind of got a lot of backlash because I think most people recognize they use steel in automobiles and homes and businesses and everywhere, refrigerators. Like steel is in everything, and it's just not sure if that was meant to test the intellect of the average voter, or because we know that Mark Carney is a pretty smart guy. He knows that we use steel in everything.
Yeah, and also the suggestion is almost that like steel is like equivalent to almost like a super yacht or something. It's like you buy
Yeah,
many super yachts lately. It's like okay, that would kind of make sense in a small way. Like that's the preserve of like 100 people on the planet or something like that, or 500 people, like a very small number of people. It's like okay, but steel, famously, this is the reason that countries protect their steel industry against international competition. Steel is in just about everything, and it filters through
yeah.
to every aspect
It's
of everybody's life. So yeah, I mean, it's an astonishingly, like, really,
hmm
a really mind-blowingly stupid thing to say for somebody that considers himself to be the foremost expert on economics in
well,
Canada, like the guy, the number one guy. It's
we
just appallingly stupid thing to say.
we've seen both Americans and United States governments protect steel deals when like foreign companies try to buy steel manufacturers. Like steel is such an important industry for for every country in the world. Never mind Canada or the U.S.
Totally, and that's been the case ever since steel was like, invented. It's basically been recognized as completely essential. The same way that Canada, and the Liberal Party specifically, the same way that they protect certain agricultural sectors like dairy. They do that because they say we need stability, we need price stability, and this is too important. We can't let that be subject to free market conditions because it's too important. Steel is in that category as well.
Because even in
You know,
that interview with, I think it was David Rosenberg, like he even was condescending to his answer, like when's the last time you bought steel? I think you had the exact words. Like what was the exact thing he said to Rosenberg?
well, it was something along the lines of, "Did you buy much steel recently or
Yeah,
lately?" Something like
like
that, wasn't it? It's like
it was.
that. I just don't know what to say to that. I mean, can you imagine? I was going to say it's like an your first undergraduate lecture on economics would teach you how stupid that is. But it's not even undergraduate. Like this is high school. I mean, it might even be elementary school. Like at what age do you teach kids the very fundamental, like basics of
Yeah.
macroeconomics? I don't know what age that is, but it's
So
very
who's
young
he?
that you learn this. And this guy, we can't emphasize it enough. This is the guy who puts himself forward as number one, the absolute top of the tree in terms of economics in Canada. Nobody's above him. He's the king of economics in Canada in the Canadian context, and yet he says something that's stupid. I mean, I have the feeling that he's probably like tearing himself up about that, and he's probably very unhappy that he made that comment because
What
it's
was he?
so dumb, and everybody can see that it's dumb.
Well, I don't think he actually believes it though, but maybe he thought that the intellect of the average voter would buy it.
Maybe, but if that's true, why did he choose steel? It's such an obvious um, commodity. It's like everybody knows how important steel is. That like there are old like idioms related to steel, aren't they? Like U.S. steel. It's like old sayings about how important it is. I mean, everybody knows that. Everybody. Yeah, yeah. Even people who are completely disengaged with politics or economics. Nobody likes economics, but I mean politics. Even those people know that steel's important. I mean, absolutely everybody knows that steel's important. It's like it's the stupidest thing he could have said. I mean, maybe if he'd said something like say about like luxury yachts or something like that, okay, maybe that might have sort of worked. But even then, that's kind of dumb because the luxury yacht manufacturers in places like the Netherlands, they actually, there's quite a lot of economic. They produce a lot of value in the economy. So even that would be stupid.
And then we haven't heard a lot from Karina Gold. She's another one of the Liberal leadership hopefuls, and she's tossing out some. This is one of her newsletter there, saying that we don't need another coronation, that people get to vote. So I mean, she's talking about the messaging out there is that the Mark Carney is a coronation, and she's like, obviously not getting a lot of attention.
And you're getting these emails direct from Karina as well, I
I
see.
am. Look, this one even had my name on it. Mark Carney sent one out that just said, "Dear first name."
That sounds about right for him, doesn't it? Like he doesn't need to know your name.
I got one from
He's
Mark,
too
and I
good
think
to know your name.
that one is all over the internet as well because he sent that out to a lot of people, dear first name. So whoever's running his email blast forgot to put in the first name. This one doesn't have my last name and doesn't have a salutation either, like dear Jim, or you know what I mean. Like this is how fast maybe they're sending out, or they whatever
Yeah.
they're having their children do it, or who's running these email campaigns. I don't know, right? But it seems like like it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like there's a lot of people stepping up the podium saying that we got to buy Canadian and stuff like that, and I agree with that. Like we should be supporting Canadian companies, but realizing that when Trudeau is saying that the federal government spends hundreds of millions of dollars with McKinsey and Company for consulting, which is a U.S. based firm,
Yeah. Well, I
hundreds of
mean,
millions of dollars that they spend on U.S. based marketing agencies.
yeah, and I would add that much like American alcohol, I feel like American consultancy firms aren't very good. We could certainly live
Yeah, I'm
without
sure. What's
McKinsey, just
what's
like we
wrong?
can live without garbage like Jack Daniels.
And then the other thing is that this is just we're just jumping up on a soapbox here. The other one is like they're supporting U.S. based media platforms here in Canada. Like I think it's there's one that has a whole bunch of publications that is owned by a U.S. company and that gets the journalism credit as well, plus advertising support, and independent media like us get zero. Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it?
Certainly doesn't make any sense to me. No.
There you go. Then our friend Ruby Dalla, another liberal leader hopeful. She's good for the memes. There she goes. She's got, because the other this slag out there on Mark Carney is that he's talking to MPs like he's already the prime minister, and that's where that coronation comment comes from Karina Gold as well. So they're, like she's making the claim that is he on the call with Donald Trump. He's been in the background the whole time. He builds himself as an outsider, but he's been in the background the whole time with Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland.
Yeah, and officially as well. I mean, it's acknowledged by the federal government that he's advising um, the Liberals on economic policy. Like he actually does have a formal role in the government. He's not completely in the shadows, but his language is very much he speaks with authority, like he knows he has authority. I mean, he even did an interview, um, which is strange in itself, I should say. But he did an interview with a British broadcaster. I think it was last. It was on Friday, I think, and he was talking to them, and he was like every bit sort of playing the role of Canada's prime minister. It was almost surreal. He was kind of like saying, "Well, what we'll do is we'll put retaliatory tariffs, and then we'll do that." And it's like, number one, why are you talking to the British media? You're not speaking to many people in Canada. Why are you talking to the British? Like, he's done the British and the Americans now, while being a little bit stingy when it comes to giving interviews in Canada. And then also, why are you talking like you're the prime minister? You're not even an MP. You're,
Yeah.
a sort of semi-employed
He hasn't
former
got one single
central
vote
banker.
from a Canadian citizen yet. So, but there you go.
But he understands economics. He's a real genius in that department.
And then there's this clip here from Pierre Polyev. We're going to play this video here on. Go ahead and run this.
On Canada's economy, it is reckless to remain so helplessly dependent on just one export market, the United States. Canada must also look to sell to other countries, and I've found just the one. It is a country that needs Canada's products, and it sells things that we'd benefit from buying. It's a peaceful democracy with lots of resources and famously nice people. It shares our climate, culture, and would you believe it? Their official languages are French and English, just like us. There's only one problem. This country imposes massive trade barriers on us that cost about $5,100 per person. So which country is it that we should be pursuing as our new top trading partner? Switzerland? France? No. Our new top trading partner will be Canada. But don't we already have free
We can
trade
probably
with
end it there,
ourselves?
Rommel. People can go out there and watch that whole clip themselves. The reason we bring that up to highlight is that we have so many trade barriers interprovincially, and that doesn't make any sense. Like over the past 10 years, we've killed a whole bunch of projects that allow us to trade with other nations, but we have so many trade barriers, even interprovincially, that we should fix, and so that we don't have to be so dependent on one partner.
Yeah, well, a lot of sort of intellectuals and academics in Canada and outside of Canada have said for a long time now that Canada is it's almost not even a country. That's how like restrictive interprovincial trade is, and how powerful the provinces are, versus the federal government. That it's almost like a collection of countries rather than one country. And when you look at things like this, when you actually look at the trade barriers, you can start to understand why people say that. I mean, especially when it comes to things like things like doctors, for example, like to be
Yeah,
to be a doctor in whatever Quebec, and then you want to come and move somewhere else. It's just like you might as well move to another country. Like
yeah.
it
That's
would be
one
a
of the
similar
biggest.
ordeal.
That is one of the biggest pieces of nonsense that there is. Nurses that work in, like in Alberta have to get registered here. You know what I mean? It's just like it doesn't make any sense. If we have a qualified, healthcare worker, why aren't they qualified across Canada? Like they have a Red Seal, but that's one of the things that the Conservatives are talking about. Like the Red Seal program works for tradespeople. Why isn't there a similar program for healthcare professionals, which is one of our biggest problems in Canada?
Totally. But every time it's been tried, every time interprovincial trade, somebody's like tackled that, there's always one province that will just say no, and then that's the end of it, really, isn't it? Because they all have their own quirky ways of doing things, usually based on their kind of appeasement of some pressure group in that province. And then when they get round the table, they just say, "Oh no, I can't do that. That's not politically possible." And then after all of that, you end up with this incredibly stupid situation where you can't even drive a truck over the border. I mean, the borders, they shouldn't exist. They should be as like ludicrous and imaginary as the borders between the counties of England, really, shouldn't they? It's in terms of like trade and things like that anyway. It's so absurd that like all of a sudden you cross, from let's say Quebec to Ontario or something like that. And then it's just like you're in a whole new world, really, aren't you? It's like that's completely absurd. And as somebody that came to Canada from another country, it's I would say certainly it is the most insane thing about Canada that barely anybody in the rest of the world even knows about.
Well, I mean, one of the biggest problems that we've had is all the pipeline deals that have been nixed, and the Energy East pipeline, which is a big one, right? Right now, we have trouble turning off oil and gas to the U.S. because if we wanted it to the east, it has to actually go into the U.S. and come back up into the east. So the Energy East pipeline, the Keystone XL pipeline, the Northern Gateway pipeline, all of those are huge mega projects that were killed under the Liberal government. The Northern Gateway pipeline, initially approved in 2014, was later rejected by the Liberal government in 2016. A company with a moratorium on crude oil tankers on the British Columbia's northern coast.
Yeah, and the companies involved in that are now saying, and the other one, the Northern Gateway and the Eastern one, they're like saying they're sort of reluctant to commit now, aren't they? Because they've been burned too many times in the past.
Well, if you take a
So
look at
it's,
the
even if they were approved again, it would be quite a mission to get them to actually build it.
Yeah, and if you take a look in Alberta, the Teck Resources withdrew its Frontier Oil Sands project in February 2020. I remember this one very, very vividly. After investing already $1.5 billion into the development, the proposed $20 billion project would have been one of the largest oil sands developments in Canada, capable of producing over 260,000 barrels of oil a day. Let's think if we had that right now. And they blamed the Liberal government for that.
I mean, meanwhile, in the US, even on like this started under Obama in the US, but so I was going to say like even under the Democrats, but I mean this is as much a Democrat thing as a Republican thing, but they're just green lighting everything, you know?
Yep.
They
Exactly.
because of the war on terror, that kind of freaked them out a lot, I think, that having to rely on the Persian Gulf to fuel
Yes.
their economy.
So Teck said that they cited uncertainty around Canada's climate policy as the key reason for the withdrawal after spending $1.5 billion. And that was a huge project, would have been the largest project. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Americans have shown the way. As much as they're out of fashion in Canada right now, the Americans, but they have shown the way. Make sure that you're completely energy self-sufficient and that you just do what you can, build what you can. And to be honest, that's probably if you actually care about carbon emissions, you care about the global warming or whatever. That's probably the best thing that could possibly happen because it's countries like Canada that innovate and produce new technologies that bring emissions down anyway.
yeah.
So
So here's more. A 2022 report: 9 mining projects valued at $13 billion were put on hold or canceled in 2022. 2023, 15 mining projects valued at $10 billion were put on hold, canceled, or suspended. And this just, you go on and on and on. These figures in the past 2 years, a total of 24 mining projects halted, a combined potential investment of $23.4 billion. That's why our miners go overseas into different countries to mine, because it just can't get done here.
yeah. And yet the people who say no to these projects are the same people that brag about how excellent their critical mineral strategies are and how that gives us leverage over the Americans. There's a little bit of a paradox there.
This is how we find ourselves under the gun with the U.S. as our biggest trading partner, and now the biggest bully in the room, and now we're on bended knee, and we're like it's definitely, we don't have a lot of options because it's not like we can get these things up and running in 15 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing though, isn't it? How long they take. That's to do with regulations and red tape and whatnot. But even in the best case scenario, you're looking at like sometimes a decade, aren't you, just to get these things sorted out.
And then Vasi Kapelis from CTV, one of the better journalists out there, definitely had LeBlanc on there and asked him the tough question and just listened to him stammer his way through it.
What if though, Minister, with all respect, you do need to come to Parliament to have, extraordinary measures like during the pandemic, like CERB, like whatever it happens to be. I mean, we're talking about an entire industry, the backbone of the most populous province in this country, which could collapse in a week. And are you really telling Canadians that their parliamentarians shouldn't be debating, discussing, representing them in deciding how to best address this? And what message does that send to the U.S.?
We'll make all the decisions necessary to support workers and businesses. So if that circumstance that you described turns out to be the case, obviously we would do what is necessary.
So you're not going to avoid it just to stave off an election, to be clear?
But again, therein lies the contradiction. The opposition parties have vowed at the first opportunity to cause an election. That's a guaranteed way to make sure that Parliament doesn't meet for 2 or 3 more months. So they can't have it both ways. You can't say, hurry up, bring Parliament back because we want to have an election, which would mean that Parliament would not be
the timing is essentially set off by the Prime Minister deciding at the point he did to vacate his position. I mean, it's not the opposition's fault that he waited until he did.
The issue is, does the government have the necessary instruments and programs to support sectors of the economy and workers? The answer is yes. The politics of people parading around the foyer of the House of Commons with manufactured outrage, you've been around long enough, Vashi, that's a whole separate conversation. The focus that we think Parliament and parliamentarians should have is what they can do in their communities to frankly give voice to the business leaders and to the workers that are concerned about this. And you have 13 premiers and a federal government that have said they'll work together to do what's necessary. I think we should be careful not to talk about a COVID-like circumstance. Some people have done that. I haven't done that. COVID is where the government of Canada shut down entire sectors of the economy for a public health emergency.
But I mean, entire sectors of the economy could be shut down because of this.
Absolutely, and the government will be there to support them.
Okay, I got to leave it there. I'm out of time. I appreciate your time, Minister. Thank you so much.
That's good.
What if though, Minister, with...
So there you go. Doesn't sound like they want to bring Parliament back, because they obviously the answer is because they're worried that they're going to have to go into an election, and they wish to cling to power.
I mean, he's been given an indefensible position to espouse there, hasn't he, Dominic LeBlanc? I don't think it's a classic situation where a politician clearly doesn't believe what he's saying, but he's been told to go out and trot that line. So he's done his best, hasn't he? But he looked sick of his life there. He also was wrong, we should say. And I'm surprised that Vasi didn't say this at the time, but I guess she had other priorities in that interview. But he's wrong to say that the opposition parties have all said they're going to get rid of the Liberals at the earliest opportunity. Not so long ago, last week, Jagmeet Singh came out and said that isn't any longer his plan. So he said that if the Liberals bring Parliament back, they'll support them and then call an election in March. So, I mean, that's just plain wrong. The premise is wrong.
And we said we're going to engage with the comments that we get. This one I find interesting because they said that Vasi is a conservative shill and and CTV is conservative. I haven't heard that before. So
CTV conservative, that is a good one.
Yeah, so
I would say, I mean, come on, CTV is sort of left liberal. It says that it's basically neutral. It says it doesn't have a political position, but it's left liberal. Come on.
Journalists have a responsibility to hold power accountable, and that's what Vasi's doing there. That's what she's asking questions, and that's what journalists are supposed to do: ask questions, not prop up governments.
Indeed.
Yeah. Anyway, Mexico made a deal. We'll talk about it in a second here, but Justin Trudeau has spoke to Donald Trump this morning, and supposedly he's going to speak again at noon. Again, Mexico has a deal, a delay anyway, in their deal, and they're going to send some people to the border. And the Americans have also, I mean, the Mexicans, president has also said that America needs to stop guns flowing into Mexico, and like Donald Trump wants drugs to stop flowing into the U.S. And you've made that point many times that we have a problem with guns flowing into Canada, but I haven't heard the politicians make that claim yet.
I'm quite surprised. I think I've heard Polyev say it. Maybe he said it actually at the weekend. One little brief comment about it, but I am quite surprised. And it isn't just that. It isn't just guns. It's obviously other drugs as well. Because obviously, the thing with fentanyl, as we've said before, you can make it anywhere. And that's why it's possible to manufacture it in Canada. I mean, I think they still get the materials from China, though, which makes it all the more bizarre that China would be given a 10% tariff while Canada gets 25.
Yeah.
But other drugs that kill people and ruin people's lives, like cocaine, tend to come up from the US, don't they, into Canada? So that's another one. I mean, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things that haven't been mentioned as well, where it's like because one of the points Trump keeps making is about NATO and the military, and how basically Canada doesn't spend enough on its military, which I think most people would agree on in Canada for reasons
Well,
related
the stats
to
show that.
Canada.
Yeah. Yeah. The stats support that.
Yeah, but they make it seem, these people, and they're unchallenged on this, and I don't know why that's the case. But these Americans, they try and make it seem that that America defends Canada out of the goodness of its heart. It's just like they sit there, it's like we gotta protect our buddy Canada. That's not it. Canada is in the way of the rest of the world. If you go north from the US puts planes in the sky over Canada because it wants to protect the US. It's not about Canada. We let them. That's the way to rephrase and flip that argument. Say, we allow you to defend yourself over our country because we're that nice to you, America. And not only that, but we stand in the way of the bullets that come flying from China and Iran and all these other countries because we stand by you. And when you pick a fight, America, Mr. Big Sam there, when you pick a fight with, I don't know, Iran or something like that, Canada's usually there. We don't have to be there. Or Afghanistan and the Taliban, that wasn't Canada's fight. But Canada still made it Canada's
I
fight. You know
think.
what I mean? It's like
Yeah. I
countries
think
like
the.
Russia would not try and subvert democracy or whatever it is they do in Canada if Canada wasn't best friends with the US. But again, this is not being articulated. Canada takes a lot of flack because of America. And then and also very generous with America in terms of letting them use airspace and so on. And then they turn around and say, "Oh, you're not doing enough to protect yourself." It's just infantile, stupid reasoning from the Americans, but they can go on being this stupid because nobody ever challenges them on it.
I think the only fights that we've stayed out of from our American friends is the second Iraq War with George W. Bush and the coalition of the willing when Jean Chrétien refused to take part in that, and then they changed the name of French fries at that time. Remember that? in the
Yeah,
United
well, that's because the
States,
French also said no, didn't they?
yeah, they call them
Jacques Chirac.
freedom fries. And then I think Vietnam was the only other one that we didn't partake in, but we were there every other time.
But this is the thing with a lot of people in America, and it's especially true of the Republicans and the kind of like isolationist right or neo-isolationist right. They seem to think that their empire that they've created, which uses NATO as its primary tool, that is somehow for the benefit of everybody else and not them. Obviously not. I mean, I can give them a reading list, but I'm sure they don't need that from me. They'll have access to the biggest brains in the US. Just speak to some of them. They'll explain to you what the American empire is about. I mean, NATO was created. NATO's informal motto was, to describe its purpose, was keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. That's basically NATO in a nutshell. It's all about American foreign policy, just to summarize so that we don't end up speaking for an eternity. American foreign policy is basically designed around preventing a challenger, preventing a rival from emerging anywhere else in the world. And the main area that they look at, the place that they're most afraid of this happening, is Central Europe and Russia joining together and becoming, that's what the Cold War was about, really. It was trying to stop that happening, because then you would have European technical brilliance and know-how and all the rest of it, and Russian resources, and that could theoretically result in a navy and a military that could challenge the United States, and an economy. That's the big fear of the Americans. This was articulated also by Paul Wolfowitz very recently, within the last sort of 20 years. This is like, there are documents that explain this. So that's what the Americans are trying to do. That's their survival mechanism. And for them to then kind of create this entire apparatus over decades and then start complaining about it. I mean, it's just so ludicrous. It's so stupid on the face of it, And this is something that so many of the servants of Donald Trump and his kind of intellectual slaves, these people don't ever seem to acknowledge that. They never seem to speak about that. I'm not sure if they actually even know that.
Well, we talked about this a second ago. Mexico has struck a deal, and it got a delay of a month in exchange for the Mexican government sending 10,000 National Guardsmen to secure the border. So there is U.S. military on the border, and it sounds like the Mexican will be putting military on the border. So that is, that's one of the conditions they have. And then so I guess we're awaiting that phone call with Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump here around noon.
Also funny, I would add that just how quickly and without any hesitation, the Mexicans have just totally bailed on Canada and any idea that they would work together, just like the Canadians did to the Mexicans right at the start of this. There's
Well,
absolutely no loyalty between Canada and Mexico, is there?
Well, I mean, to be fair to the Mexicans, we were spitting in their face just recently when we were trashing them.
Totally, I'm saying, yeah, and there's actually not very much trade even between them. But there's
No.
also there's no real friendship. There's no real like amity between Canada and Mexico. And
Well,
that's
they
one of
compete.
the advantages the Americans have, isn't it? It's like divide and rule. It's very easy
Well,
for them to do that.
well, I mean, Canada and Mexico have been competing, right? Like for auto jobs for sure, right? Manufacturing, like like Ford, move the plant to Mexico, move the plant to Ontario. So it's been a competition between those two nations, right? Because again, both Canada and the U.S., Canada and Mexico rely heavily on the Americans.
Totally. And that's to go back on my rant of a few minutes ago. That's by design. That's what the Americans want because that's best for the Americans because they get to control their neighbors. Again, which why it's so stupid that Trump would alienate you know, his own neighbors and his own allies and friends, and beyond that, his own servants. That's basically what Mexico and Canada are. They serve the United States. They do what the United States asks, and that's brilliant for America. Which it just highlights how bonkers this is that Trump would be upset about a situation that benefits him so obviously.
Yeah, so the poly markets is what we've seen with the election in the U.S. We've seen it with even, like Taylor Swift stuff. So the poly markets are saying that there's likely going to be, the tariffs will get removed, like favoring that anyway by May. So that's according to the poly markets. And if you're a betting person, you can go there and put some money down.
I love that that is something you can bet on. So
I think you can bet
that
on
makes me
anything.
chuckle.
You can bet on anything, right? So, and then Trump, not having enough people to fight with, has now decided that he's going to fight with the South Africans and I think the Europeans. He's chucked some thoughts out there.
Yeah, and the British. I mean, it's quite
Yeah.
funny the way he threatens them all. But the British, I mean, that one is completely bananas because there is no. I think actually the Americans have a trade surplus with the British, but either way, it's very small. So he doesn't have that economic argument anymore. It's just kind of, it doesn't really make sense. It's almost like he's gone down the list of America's best friends, and he's like, all right, who's next? But this thing with South Africa this is something different. This is to do with the South African government has put through like an expropriation law or a new one. Actually, they already had one in place, but they've put a new one on the books, and it's very like as is true of everything in South Africa, it's very like racially tinged and sort of racially sensitive. And Elon Musk, who is obviously from South Africa, he's upset about that as well, and he's accused the South African government of being racist because most of the land in South Africa is owned by white farmers, and the fear from a lot of people in South Africa and outside of South Africa is that the government is just going to take the land off them, off the white farmers, which is what happened in Zimbabwe under Robert Mugabe. So, all eyes are on South Africa in that regard because, Zimbabwe is a failed state now, and many people link it to that expropriation that occurred under Mugabe. So it's
I
an
think
interesting one to watch.
I think Donald Trump has a thing on his list that he needs to get done. He said he was going to end the Ukraine war. He said he was going to end the Hamas thing. That looks like that peace deal is hanging on there right now. But the Ukraine-Russia war still goes on. Like he may put some energy there instead of trying to put Canada and Mexico into economic turmoil.
You would think that that's what a smart fella would do, wouldn't you?
Yeah. And then J.D. Vance, the vice president, he put out this tweet. I guess he's jumping on the X too to kind of like throw some shade at Canada. Spare me the sob story about it. Canada's our best friend. I love Canada, many Canadian friends, but the government not meeting their NATO targets. Okay.
I just thought this was interesting because JD Vance is like he's looked upon as the much smarter, much more humane,
Reasonable one.
um, yeah, reasonable, like the good cop to Trump's bad cop. And then he's come out and just said something extraordinarily vulgar and ugly and distasteful about America's best friendship, the best relationship that America has ever had with any country ever, and probably ever will have. And to say something as brain dead as that, referring to that as a sob story, it's just, I mean, it's hard to believe that this is the Republican Party. The Republican, I could maybe understand this from the Democrats in the past, maybe in the 80s or something like that. But for the Republican Party to do this, the Republican Party has historically, it's always been about, or at least since the Second World War, it's always been about like the Anglosphere and that like the great alliance between the Western powers. And to see a man that's considered an intellectual by a lot of people to come out and say something like that, it's to me that was quite shocking. A lot more of a shock than whatever it is Trump's, said.
And then you put this other one in our 5 things you need to know this morning. Booze bans across Canada as nation expresses the fury at American betrayal. And then, like a lot of the national anthems, there was some booze going on. And then, even British Columbia here, we're banning booze from, which is weird as all get out on Republican states. But most of the booze in our liquor stores comes from California. So not much of a real ban. So
Yeah, I mean, also, what is a red state? I mean, a lot of them flip
yeah.
quite often. Famously, that's what decides an election. It's like, is it just the ones that voted for Trump just now? Because that's a little bit harsh on like Wisconsin or whatever,
I
because
think
they're often a blue state.
a little bit of virtue signaling there with the booze ban. Like coming out and say we're banning booze from Republican states when like full knowing that most of the booze comes from Democratic states that's sold in BC liquor stores.
Yep, California, Oregon, and even Washington as well. They pump out quite a lot of wines, don't they? I
Yeah.
mean, it's it's a funny one. I would say that the booze ban almost should be made for moral reasons. That should be made in the interests of
Like an
good
all-out
alcohol
booze
because
ban
the Americans
always.
don't produce very good booze.
Like you got to love their beer, right?
I mean, do you? Do you have
No,
to? Because I certainly don't.
there you go. I mean, you're an English person, so you're obviously a connoisseur of beer, no?
Well, I would say if Canada said we'll have our own beers, we'll have Canadian beer, and then we'll import beer from Belgium, Germany, and England, or let's say the British Isles, so we can get Guinness as well. That would suffice for the rest of time, I would say. You don't need to look further than that. I mean, Belgium on its own has more varieties of beer
Well,
than like
isn't the
basically
hottest
anywhere
thing
in the
in
world.
isn't the hottest thing in beer the microbreweries though, when people are buying just local beer?
Yeah, and it's, what can American beer? I mean, come on. Who is it that loves American beer? And I'm probably going to make somebody very angry by saying that, but it's not what they're famous for, the Americans, really.
Yeah, Pepsi Cola and Coca-Cola.
Yeah, that's what they're famous for, and Big Macs. And then don't get me started on the whiskey, for God's sake. Don't waste your time on that.
There you
Drink,
go.
you might as well drink Canadian whiskey, but if you're actually going to drink whiskey, get it from Scotland. That's the only place to get it from.
The stock market reacting though to this morning to the trade war though for sure spooled off, especially stocks like Tesla, and that have been a target for many liberals and Democrats when they go after like Ontario canceled their $100 million deal with Starlink, which is not Tesla, but it is a SpaceX thing. And a lot of this stuff, I'm sure, once this thing goes away, we'll all go back to normal as well. But definitely, Elon Musk puts his name out there, and he tries to cause some. He puts a lot of political commentary out there, so he becomes a target for that.
Yeah, and this is why like the shareholders on a number of occasions have expressed dissatisfaction, Tesla shareholders, haven't they, with him, with his tweets and all that. That seems to have died down a little bit lately because Tesla's been doing so well. But I
Mm-hmm.
mean, a lot of shareholders don't really like that he does that because I mean, he is exposing himself, but he's also, it's like it's pros and cons, isn't it? Because he's also now got the ear of the president in a way that almost no like private citizen in the US has ever had, or at least in my memory. He's got access to the president in just like a massive way, and that's obviously going to benefit his companies as well. So it's like it's pros and cons really. But I
Yeah.
think in Canada there's a special sort of interest in Elon Musk because he is a Canadian citizen, and I believe his mother is Canadian, isn't she, from Saskatchewan or somewhere
She
like that.
is.
So I think a lot of people look at Elon, it's kind of like, why are you on the other team, kind of thing? Like, don't you have any loyalty or any affection for Canada? And I think it's that special sense of betrayal there that a lot of people feel.
Yes, and then gold up this morning. Um, Again, based on like the tariff wars, and that gold is definitely one of the barometers. But it's holding over that $2,800 mark. In the chart, looks pretty favorable still, and it looks like it needs to break past that. I mean, some people say it's going to challenge for 3,000. That'd be its next big push out. And then Bitcoin sold off dramatically on the trade war stuff, and then it's recovering right now because this, like the Mexican thing, is kind of like settled out. And then I would say the Canadian dollar had a huge drop on the weekend based on this trade war. But again, it looks like there might be a deal. I mean, that's what some of the people are saying. So that the dollar has recovered a little bit. But you can see that precipitous drop there as this deadline was imposed, right? Because Reuters had reported that there was a month delay, and then all of a sudden they said that story was false, and all of a sudden the dollar sold off dramatically, and then again it's recovered a bit, sitting at the 68.5 mark there. So interesting to see what the markets are saying. And right now the markets look like it's saying that there may be at least a reprieve. So we'll see. Shall we not? Right?
Well, it seems like the natural inclination of the markets lately is to be bullish.
Mm,
Bulls on campus lately.
yeah.
So I feel like maybe they're just also I think it's because it's so like obviously um stupid. I think a lot of people think, nah, there's no way he's for real because it's so
And
stupid. But like a lot of people are incapable of thinking that maybe maybe he actually believes in this stuff.
now, trade wars are not good for anybody. They're not good for the consumer, not good for the Americans, not good for the Canadians, not good for the Mexicans, definitely not good for the stock market. You know what I mean? Like nobody likes a trade war, and and Donald Trump likes the markets and he likes prosperity. So, I mean, I'm still with the feeling that he's using this all just to be, the bully. And I think, like Marco Rubio was saying that a lot has to do with, the accepting of people from Gaza, and which are threats to the United States. I haven't heard Trump say it, but I have heard Marco Rubio say it. So it
Yeah,
has
and
a
I think
lot to do with
maybe
that.
Tom Homan might have said that. Or Tom Homan said something similar, didn't he? Where he said it's like it's too easy to get into Canada
Yeah.
in
And
general.
and so that is one of their concerns for sure. And that, like Daniel Smith is still definitely trying to play the calmer head there and trying to say, let's negotiate, as opposed to just throwing barbs across the fence there. Doug Ford is definitely posturing though, right? Because obviously he wants to run an election. He wants to look tough. Nothing like a tough Doug Ford, right?
But I also think this sort of like transcends logic in a way, doesn't it? And it concerns more like emotive things, like matters of the heart. Like Canada is being betrayed, number one, and
Yeah.
insulted. And the Americans, the president, lots of senators, the governor of Texas, we haven't even talked about that. These people, very, very powerful, prominent people in America, are spitting in the face of Canada. At some point, you've got to say something, haven't you? Otherwise,
It
you just make
it's
yourself, like a beggar before the master.
it seems like an unnecessary turmoil. I mean, and again, in stock markets, turmoil is when you make money because that's the opportunity. Maybe that was the point. I don't know, but let's hope that a lot of Canadians are definitely wringing their hands right now, especially without like clear leadership. We have a resigned prime minister, a prorogued parliament, and we're very vulnerable. And we've had policies over the past 10 years that have really cut access to our natural wealth. I mean, Pierre Poilievre has said it really well, and I mean, I've been saying it forever too, that Canada should be one of the richest nations in the world. You've said it. Like, look at the model of Norway. and their
Yep.
sovereign wealth fund. And here we have, like I listed off earlier, all the, if people just getting in here now, go back and listen to all the projects that we've kiboshed for our climate policies that the Liberal government has been putting out there. And now Carney's saying that we got to get rid of those climate policies and come back, and he's just going to rework it. Well, we need to figure out a way to generate more partners. If I was sitting in the seat right now, I'd be booking my ministers on plane trips to Japan and Europe and trying to ink some deals while you know, like we have some leverage here.
Yep. Well, the argument of Carney and the argument of Justin Trudeau, they've articulated this on a number of occasions. Carney, in his like press conference on Friday or whenever it was, spent a lot of time on this concept, which is that we go green and we have more friends, more partners, more economic partners, and we also get ahead of the curve and we make more money, makes us richer. And I just think I find that quite hard to understand, because on the matter of partners and friends, were our partners and friends happy with us? Do you think it improved our relationship when we said no during the height of the energy crisis in Europe, caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, when they came and begged, when they got on their knees and begged Justin Trudeau to export gas and we said no? Do you think that improved partnerships and relationships? And then in terms of wealth, has it really made us wealthier? Like in the grand scheme, when we kneecap ourselves and say, no, we're not going to build pipelines and stuff like that. What we're going to do instead is we're going to focus on hydrogen and windmills and stuff, and that'll make us loads richer in the like, in the long in the rest of this century or whatever. In the long term, it'll make us richer. It's like I'm not actually sure about that, especially when I look at Norway. And I look at Norway's sovereign wealth fund, which the last time I looked, that was like $2 trillion or something. It's something like that, isn't it? It's the biggest wealth fund in the world, I think. And Saudi Arabia's got one like that. And I just think, well, actually, maybe they are going to be richer, and it's courtesy of fossil fuels, not because they've adapted to hydrogen and
So
windmills.
I would advise everybody to go read Mark Carney's platform that's on his website there, and it talks about what he's going to do. The RBC was one of the last Canadian banks to leave his net zero climate alliance. So most of the U.S. big banks have left, and now I think all of the Canadian banks have left. RBC left just a couple of days ago. And then if you go read his platform, he was the chair of this net zero alliance. And now he's saying on his platform that he will, if he's prime minister, he will mandate corporations to fall in line with climate agendas and punish like people that try to export into Canada with climate taxations and tariffs. And here's the people that are talking about we don't need tariffs, and he's talking basically about the same thing, but using them for climate agenda.
Indeed. I think it's, times like that. I don't think it's about logic. I don't think it's about rationality. I think it's like pre-rational or post-rational. I think it's about something else. It's more emotional. I mean, just while you were chatting there, I went on our good friend, our best friend, ChatGPT, and asked about the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. And according to Mr. ChatGPT, it translates to 321,000 US dollars per citizen. That's
Yeah.
what fossil fuels have given the Norwegian people. Are we really going to listen and respect the person that's speaking when we hear it said that the real money, the real cash, is to be found in windmills and solar panels and so on?
Yeah,
I don't think so. Is
like I
my
said,
opinion.
like I said to every Canadian, and pass this on, go and read Mark Carney's climate platform there, and listen to the words mandate, which is what we heard in COVID. He's going to mandate businesses fall in line with the climate agenda, and he's going to tax anybody that's selling goods to even them out that come into Canada. And this is supposed to lead to prosperity for Canadians. And then if you listen to what Ian just said about the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, that's all from oil and gas and that. And then look at the actions over the past 10 years of us stifling resource companies from operating here in Canada. And now we're at the mercy of the Americans and a bully, the world's probably the biggest bully in our modern era. And ask yourselves, is this a position that Canadians want to be in? And every time that we kill projects, that money goes elsewhere. It goes to the United States. It goes in different places, and there's no capital left here. So the only people we have left to tax to deliver services that we need in the second largest landmass in the world is you, the average person. Because, like Ian just said, the sovereign wealth fund, 321,000 per person that they can use for services. Norway has huge services for people.
Yeah. Well, famously, it's like it's the best place in the world to live by certain measures. It's like top of the Human Development Index. Always in like The Economist, all these trendy sort of magazines, they always highlight how bloody brilliant it is to live there. So yeah.
I mean, again, I would just advise people to go and educate yourself and just go look at what's going on, and just like you don't even have to listen to us. Just go and listen. Just go out there. ChatGPT is a great tool. You can ask it so many questions, right? So,
And also, sorry, just one last word on that. As you've mentioned this loads of times, the Norwegians are like some of the very best in the whole world. In fact, I think they might be the best when it comes to EVs
yeah,
in terms of like the
94%,
transition to, yeah, the
94%.
transition to the new technologies. You can
Yeah,
do both. You can make yourself filthy rich and also stop polluting the environment and stop
yeah.
emitting carbon.
Yeah, should we be good citizens and good stewards of the earth? Yes. Should we bankrupt our citizens for some agenda that is we're not even sure who it serves? It seems like the people making money off of it might be the people that are pushing it. An interesting point, though, that if we talk about Teslas for a second, Tesla had said on February 1st the price of the Model Ys is going to go up by $4,000, but it's February 3rd and the prices have not increased as yet. I've been watching that to see if they were going to go up. It said the Model 3s and Model Ys prices were going to go up. I know they've been dropping them in the US, but they did threaten that the prices would go up here in Canada, but they have not as yet. Again, we hope that there's at least a pause so that we can get some proper negotiations going with this. Again, the one question I have is like, why haven't we said, because there is a framework in there, the USMCA, that we should be taking Trump to court. He loses in court lots. And he even says it himself. He's using emergency powers to do this because he has to follow the USMCA because there's mechanisms in place there. He's saying it's a border crisis. So that's the reason that he's allowed to go outside the USMCA. We just have to prove to a court, like we should be filing an injunction right now and proving to a court that we're doing everything we can to like stop the flow of illegal immigrants in the United States. And then he doesn't have a leg to stand on, and we can sue him for any of those tariffs.
Yeah, but I mean, Canada has done that before, and the Americans and won. Sorry, so we've taken it to these like trade tribunals. We've
Yep.
won, and then the Americans have just said, "I don't care," and then that's the end. Doesn't go anywhere from there. Nothing changes. Even Biden, a couple of years ago, Biden did that. Biden just said, "Oh, we disagree with this judgment, so we're not going to do anything about it," because that's the truth. International law, which is what that is, that's what we're discussing here. International law, it's not really law. That's the wrong word because
It's an agreement.
It's not
It's a
like
contract.
it's
Yeah.
not like a law. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not even a contract. It's like two countries temporarily doing things together, and if either of them doesn't like it for a second, then they'll just stop doing it, and then you go back to the law of the jungle. So it's like, I mean, maybe you're right there that would be a good PR move because then it might kind of like, but would it? I mean, does anybody really care anymore? But it probably be worth doing it just to like for the sake of like looking like you're in the right and they're in the wrong. But at the end of the day, it wouldn't change things. The Americans would just ignore it. And that is even if we went now to a court and then the judgment came in after Trump's gone, let's just imagine that Gavin Newsom or some random Democrat like that is in power, then that Democrat would also just ignore it, like we saw with Biden, because they don't care either. So I don't think it's an option really.
So we are getting comments both on YouTube and on TikTok, and there's some nice comments there on YouTube. So we do appreciate the comments for sure, and we appreciate all comments as long as they're not super mean. But
no, we love the mean ones. They're the best ones.
well, we don't want to encourage meanness for sure.
Yeah, we want it to be spontaneous meanness. Don't just do fake meanness.
Yeah, don't be a fake meanie. Again, we definitely appreciate your comments and your viewership, and you can find us online all the time at kelownanow.com. We upload our story load, and obviously we're going to be uploading a story as soon as we hear from Justin Trudeau. And if it's breaking news, maybe Ian and I will jump back on and talk about what happens here after that phone call. I'm sure we'll know what's going on here. My fingers are crossed that we get at least a reprieve so that we can have some time to negotiate a better path forward. Yeah, and then again, we're on TikTok, YouTube. We're not on Instagram because of Bill C-18, which is one of the things that if we could ask the new Liberal hopefuls if they were going to get rid of Bill C-18 with a bunch of other bills that they should be repealing, that would be great. But we do have a newsletter that goes out 365 days a year before 7 a.m. So with that said, we do appreciate your support and your comments. Thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news, we live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News you can trust.